Assalamu alaikum, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Muslims in America, where I interview Muslim elected officials and community influencers to find out how they got to where they are and to find out the steps that it takes for you to get there as well. I am your host, Mayor Mohamed Khairullah from Prospect Park, New Jersey. Before we move on to my guest, if this is your first time on this show, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. And if you like what you hear, and you learn something, please make sure that you hit the like button. Let's go. Welcome back, everyone. I'm here with a very dynamic young man, a man that I had the honor of swearing him into office. He was elected to the second largest city in the state of New Jersey at the age of 20. He is going to Harvard Law School, and he also has a nonprofit organization that focuses on developing leaders, and I'm going to ask him about it coming up soon. Well, help me welcome Commissioner Mussab Ali. Commissioner, thank you very much, and welcome to Muslims in America. How are you doing today?
Assalamu alaikum, Mayor Khairullah. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the invitation. I'm sure everyone who's watching this show is very familiar with so much of your work and how you've been such a leader in the Muslim community, especially in terms of elected office.
Thank you. Commissioner, as I mentioned in your little intro, you were elected at the young age of 20. You are still a college student. What inspired you to run at such a young age?
Yeah, so, like a lot of immigrant kids growing up, my parents told me you could either be a doctor or engineer. I said I wanted to be a doctor, and that's what I went to school for. And, when I was in college, I started to learn a little bit more, sort of diversified my learning. And, it was at the same time that Bernie Sanders was running for president the first time and Donald Trump was running. And I started to realize that, politics actually had a great influence in our lives, that, there were so many important people that cared about politics. And I started to wonder, why is it that immigrant communities, that minority communities really don't? And so by virtue of not knowing anything about politics, me and a couple of friends, we just decided, all right, why don't I just run for office? And we decided the most local office that I could do to kind of, get involved was the school board. And so in 2016, I ran, was unsuccessful. But then in 2017, I ran again and fortunately won the seat.
Awesome. So that leads me to the question, why did your friends pick you? Did you have any certain characters?
Yeah, I think really for me, it was the fact that I was pretty outspoken. At the time, Trump had just, as a candidate, he had been speaking about, how Islam hates us. And he had talked specifically about Jersey City. He had said, there were thousands and thousands of people cheering in Jersey City, New Jersey. And those are the kind of things that, gets a person like me very angry. I have a lot of hometown pride. I care a lot about the people in my city. And I know for a fact that that's not an accurate representation whatsoever of the people of my city. And I really, wanted to respond to that in some way. And so I think that's what really led my friends to say, listen, if you really want to do something about it, why don't you run for office? Like, why don't you take that step of, putting yourself out there in front of, thousands of voters in my city and representing what it means to be a Muslim from Jersey City.
So you mentioned that you lost the first election, you won the second election. What was the difference? What pushed you over the edge?
Yeah, I think the most important thing for me was sort of this recognition of what it means to run for office and sort of how to get your message out there. So I became a lot more, versatile with what it meant in terms of social media. We got a lot more crafty with our messaging. And honestly, our campaign just grew, right? I mean, the first year when I was running, I really didn't know anything about politics. I didn't really know who to turn to, who the key players were. But by my second year when I was running, we won that election by 68 votes, right? It was by no means a landslide. I think I had 9,388 votes. My opponent had 9,320. And so for the people out there that think, my vote doesn't matter, for me, it was a matter of 34 residents who picked me instead of somebody else that really got me over the edge. And so, it was that strategy of targeting every single last voter and the momentum we had from the last year that I think people really were like, a young guy is interested and involved, and it made the case.
What were the issues that you focused on, and was the fact that you are a Muslim candidate, obviously your name is very obvious, did it help you? Did it hinder you? Can you speak to that?
Sure. So I think the biggest thing we focused on in our campaign was really having a coalition of voters supporting us. So we didn't necessarily target just Muslims in Jersey City. We really focused on broadening our campaign to young people in general. Right. This idea that students and young people are underrepresented in politics and definitely underrepresented in education. The end product of education is given to students and to young people, and yet we never ask them how they feel about the education system. Right? We talk to taxpayers, we'll talk to parents, we'll talk to principals, talk to teachers, but it's so rare that we talk to young people about the education that they're actually receiving. And I think to the question of my Muslimness, my name obviously is very Muslim, and I'm very proud of my identity. But I think it was something that definitely hindered my campaign, because there were many people who have misconceptions about what does it mean to be Muslim, what does Islam represent, and you recognize in America there is an entire lobby and industry built, spending millions of dollars every year perpetuating Islamophobia, and we see that at the federal level, but I think people don't recognize it kind of leaks into the local level as well, even in a city as diverse as Jersey City.
Thank you very much. We could obviously see that you're a smart and sharp young man that is determined for success. You're going to Harvard Law School. You're supposed to be a doctor. You're going to law. But sometimes when I reach out to you, I find that you are in China. I mean, you got such a busy schedule at such a young age. How do you do all of that? How do you travel, do the school board? You're doing school. How do you manage?
Yeah, I think it's been a bit of a balancing act. There's a lot of different things that I'm really, really passionate about and that I really care about. But I try to center myself, and I try to center myself in my faith in particular, because I think I don't think that we should restrict ourselves, especially even though I am young, and I completely recognize that there is a lack of experience that I have. But I don't think that should hinder me from trying to tackle different problems that I see both in my community and around the world. And so when opportunities present themselves, I try to put myself in the best position to be able to manage whatever responsibilities I have going the best that I can. And I think it's a matter of priorities as well. I think for me, first and foremost, I think my biggest priority is definitely my elected office, because it's one thing to be elected for all these scholarship awards, or to get into a place like Harvard Law School, right? I mean, it's a couple of people look over your resume and your transcript and say, listen, we think this guy has some potential. But I think it's a whole nother thing. It's on a whole nother level when your hometown looks at you and says, listen, we want you to be responsible for the future of our children. We want you to be responsible for education for 30,000 residents of the city. And that's why I always consider that my top priority. And, everything else sort of falls under that.
In terms of getting involved in politics, was it something that you thought about in high school, or was it a natural progression from community activism? How did you get into politics? I mean, you told us that your friend suggested that you run for office, but did you always know that you wanted to run for office?
Yeah, for me, I mean, I had been active in the community to some extent. I mean, I did a lot of community service, so that meant going to soup kitchens, getting involved in terms of my local community. But I had never envisioned myself being involved in politics, and I think for a lot of communities, which you really saw, especially in Muslim communities post 9/11, is that Muslim communities became very insular. So in my election, I actually became the first Muslim ever elected into office in Jersey City. And I think the reason for that is because, the Muslim community kind of went into hiding. And despite the fact that, in our community in Jersey City and in so many cities around the United States, there are large Muslim populations. So many people in my campaign actually told me they had never met a Muslim. And that was shocking to me, right? In my own city, where I'd say maybe 10 to 15% of our population is Muslim, people had never met a Muslim. And so for me, it wasn't a natural progression to go into politics, but I think it was a necessary progression, where I kind of felt that, my skill set was something that I could contribute towards the community and towards, the understanding for many people.
So can anyone eventually run for office? I mean, do you have to have certain type of skills? Can a
I think
doctor run for office? Can a shopkeeper run for office? Or do you have to have certain type of skills?
No, I think anyone is capable of running for office. I honestly think the most important thing and the most important quality for anyone who wants to run for office is just a desire to help others. If you center yourself and you center, what you want to do and your policies around this idea of helping others, I think that ability is the most important thing that you need to have, because that's what's going to allow you to make the decisions that help people throughout your community.
Great. So let's shift gear and talk about your work on the board. What are some of the pressing issues that you are working on as a commissioner on the Board of Education? And what are some of the policies and resolutions that you help pass on the board?
Sure. So I think the biggest thing on the Board of Education when I first got there was this sort of understanding that there was a lack of recognition of a lot of groups. And so again, Jersey City being as diverse as it is, within our populace, we didn't really recognize a lot of the groups that were there. And so one of our first big accomplishments, just before I'd gotten on the board, was, getting to eat a holiday off. But then it was also recognizing, some of the Hindu holidays. It was also recognizing some of the Jewish holidays. And it was also, putting forward sort of proposals to also have a halal food in our schools. There was this proposition put forward of, understanding 15% of our population potentially were people who needed halal meals, and yet that need was never something that was addressed. And so that was put forward. Something else that I think I've been really proud of is we got a student non-voting member as part of our Board of Education. And so we have a person who is elected by the entire student body. So all the high schools come together, essentially vote for one person who sits on the Board of Education representing 30,000 students every year. We also put forward policies that reform dress code. And this is something that I thought about, and I was thinking about even as part of my legal education, is when I first got on the Board of Education, when we looked at dress code policy. So the dress code policy, it was actually written that if you wore any sort of religious headwear, so if you wore a turban or a yarmulke or a hijab, you actually had to have a note from a religious authority. And it also, kind of confined women who wanted to wear cultural headwear. And so this was an issue we had with, African girls who wanted to wear like traditional head wraps. But to consider and to think about the fact that there were people in office and there were people who were writing these policies, maybe just decades ago, who considered religious headwear to be something that had to be addressed by a religious authority. That's a kind of understanding that, that doesn't happen when you have a diverse board, but it happens when you have a very monolithic board, when you have a very, people that look the same making these policies that address so many people.
Right, right. So I'm sure you face some challenges. Can you give us examples of certain challenges, a case where someone was biased against you, where people gave you trouble because of who you are based on your background? How did you deal with it?
Yeah, I remember maybe my first day on the Board of Ed. I went to the office to kind of like check in, and I remember the security guard, asking me like, "Oh, are you an intern?" And immediately, like, I got this understanding that the people around me kind of looked at me and saw my age, and were immediately going to assume, this is someone who, he's a child, he doesn't understand what's going on here. And so initially at board meetings, I remember that there were several of my colleagues kind of, talked down to me, and when I presented my positions, didn't really take it very seriously. But I think the turning point for me was really, doing my homework and being someone who was well read, who understood the policies, who understood the numbers. And I think that's a very important trait for all elected officials, right? Is to do your homework. Because if you do your homework, you know what's going on, people are going to start to listen to you because they understand that you know what's going on.
Talk about the future. Any aspirations for higher office?
I think for me right now, I just want to focus on my education. I think it's really tough, honestly, being in elected office, even just at a school board level, and trying to balance that with legal education at a place as as difficult as Harvard Law School. And so at this point, I really can't afford to put anything else on my plate. But inshallah, we'll see in the future.
Inshallah, best of luck. All right. So, any final words of wisdom for anyone who wants to be involved in their local community, whether it's just civic organizing, volunteering, or wanting to run for political office?
Definitely. So I'll take this chance to touch a little bit about the nonprofit that we started. And so the mission of the nonprofit was to train the next generation of activists, organizers, and grassroots leaders. And the whole conception of the nonprofit came from this idea that when we looked at statistics about people and the trust in government, right? So public trust in government is at an all-time low. We're seeing that civic engagement levels of people who actually understand, general civic knowledge is at an all-time low, and so people don't really know what the government does and don't really trust the government. And so, we kind of had this idea, well, why don't we teach people what the government does, teach people how to get involved and teach people kind of like how easy it is to kind of like rub shoulders with your local elected officials. And so, we came up with this whole curriculum that kind of trains people on understanding, sort of the way the media works, the way legislation works, the way activism can be useful as a tool. And so the general advice I would give to people who want to get involved is, just step up, because I think people don't realize that there is just such a great need for people to become involved in their communities. And I think that people in your community will really thank you, for taking that chance to represent the issues that are going on. Because I think, especially as elected officials, and Mayor, I'm sure you agree with this, part of the biggest things that we're looking for is what are the issues that our residents care about, right? Like, what are the problems that they're facing so that we can address those problems? And unless there's people who are telling us what those problems are, I mean, we're not mind readers, right? Like, we can't figure out what people's problems are. And so I think it's just so important for people to step up and, reach out to your elected officials, reach out to people locally, and just become involved in your community, in your city.
Absolutely. Great words of wisdom. So I've asked you a whole bunch of questions. Now it's your time to ask me a question before we wrap it up.
Sure. So again, I have great respect for Mayor Khairullah. He's been a great mentor, and again, I think he's been someone who's been a leader in Muslim civic engagement throughout the state. And Mayor, I'm just curious, from your perspective, what has it been like, seeing so many people sort of start to step up, and where do you see the future of people, of minority communities kind of stepping up across the state of New Jersey?
Well, that is a great question. I could share with you, Commissioner, when I first ran for office in 2001, there was probably the number of Muslim elected officials, you could count them on one hand. Right now, there is over 30 Muslim elected officials in the state of New Jersey. There is a good number of candidates that are running this year. Most of them are females, so that is a great thing as well, because obviously, stereotypically, where the Muslim community is stereotyped as a male-dominant community, but the ladies are stepping up, so I applaud them for that. But I think in the future, we have to reach a certain critical level in order for us to become influencers, not only bystanders. Right now, a lot of us do influence things locally, but I don't think that we're a big influence on a state level, at least not in our state. So we need more people to step up, because if we are not at the table, as Congressman Keith Ellison once said, we are part of the menu. We're all paying into taxes. Somebody else is deciding how our taxes are paid. And like you shared earlier, there's a lot of policies that don't make sense. It's antiquated. You in your town, you're a Muslim, your mayor is Jewish, but then, you had these laws that would have prevented people from both faiths of wearing any type of religious garments or covering. Here in Prospect Park, we just recently, and I've been mayor now 15 years, we just recently had the Eid holiday and halal food instituted in our local school. Because obviously I did not interfere in the board. But people stepped up. And when people stepped up and there was enough people to cause change, then change happened. So obviously I agree with you that we need to step up. And if we want to see change on a local level, state level, and national level, we need to step up locally and then progress into higher office and higher positions to affect change nationally. So with that, I just want to thank you for your time. I know you're a very busy man, and I want to thank you for sharing the wisdom. And if people need to reach out to you for your organization, if somebody wants to learn about leadership, where can they go?
Yeah, so they can go to alileadership.com. So that's alileadership.com, and that's where you can find more information about our nonprofit. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Commissioner. Be blessed, and thank you for your time.
You too. Thank you, Mayor.
Were you inspired by Commissioner Ali? Did you learn anything from him? Also, if you liked what you heard and you learned something, please make sure that you subscribe to my channel down there. If you haven't done so, hit the like button and hit the reminder bell so you receive notification of my next episode of Muslims in America. Till we meet again, be safe, be blessed, and be active.